are this week once again back in the water. We try to get away from it, and we just seem to not be able to.
It's a splash and safari here at Bimbo Summit. Welcoming 2021 with a splash, diving right into the new year.
A new low here on the podcast.
We haven't done our Deep Sea Vince episode yet.
Today we are talking about Titanic conspiracies, not surrounding the film Titanic, although there is a notable conspiracy about who put PCP in the chowder. Look it up if you haven't heard about that one. We're talking about the real, actual boat, the Titanic, and some stuff that may or may not have happened to it. Should we start with just a broad overview for any Zoomers listening of what the Titanic is? So the Titanic was, at the time, in 1912, the largest ocean liner of all time, and it famously sank in April of that year on its maiden voyage. It was touted as being unsinkable. It was carrying 2,500 people from England to New York 4 days into a 7-day journey. It hit an iceberg in the middle of the night, and then over the course of about 3 hours, sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Because of a lack of lifeboats and a pretty bad allocation of how people were put into those lifeboats, and then also just kind of a general lack of ships around to help and take passengers, over half of the ship's passengers and crew, around 1,500 people, died, mostly of drowning or of hypothermia. There was famously a ship called the Carpathia that came and helped. There was famously a ship called the Californian that didn't help, even though it was nearby, and there's like a whole lot of interesting controversy and mystery around that also, if you care. So Titanic was one of 3 ships built by the White Star Line. They were like the biggest shipping company at the time. There was also the Olympic and the Britannic, which are very similar, and that will come up today in one of our conspiracies.
Does that have anything to do with the Encyclopedia Britannica?
Yeah, it was named after this boat.
Oh.
I would believe you. Is that true?
No, it's not. It's not true. But the point is, there are three sister ships that all looked similar, and all were involved in accidents. 2 of them sunk, and 1 of them didn't.
It's a bad ratio.
A really bad ratio. When 2 of your most expensive, largest boats
both
sink.
Sarah, where were you when the Titanic sank? Do you remember what you were doing?
I was a young wife and mother of 12 in Whitechapel, England, trying not to get killed by Jack the Ripper. You know how it goes.
Huh.
Dylan, where were you?
I was at church that day.
All day?
Yeah, all day. We had a volleyball thing that day. We had like a church volleyball tournament.
Uh-huh.
So, as we all know, the Titanic sank, and it was a huge bummer for everybody involved, really, in the whole story. Ton of people die, right? Mm-hmm. Or did they?
Whoa.
What?
There are some people who believe that it is possible for a massive air bubble to have formed in the Titanic's hull as it sank, which would have allowed, in theory, passengers to live inside the sunken Titanic. And there's all kinds of weird people on the internet trying to explain how, like the oxygen would be replenished through the water and they could have eaten kelp or whatever. I did see some people who think it's possible that there might be some kind of a multi-generational society where like there's still people down there that haven't been found by James Cameron.
He really did. I mean, that's not even really a joke.
No, not really. I mean, it's like what? It's Bob Ballard and James Cameron, right?
Yeah, James Cameron is like instrumental in the exploration of the shipwreck.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't think he was there when it was found, but he was there for like most of the subsequent explorations, like via submersible camera.
Didn't he like fund a lot of it too?
He paid for a lot of it.
So I'm asking you to imagine a multi-generational society living deep in the Atlantic Ocean of people who have just survived in this air bubble. They're eating kelp. They're catching oysters, just reaching out of the air bubble and grabbing an oyster, cooking it over a fire.
How would they get fire?
Lighter. I don't know. But this is the thing. Okay, and like more reasonably, people believe that for a time, days, weeks, months, whatever, passengers could have survived inside of an air bubble at the bottom of the ocean, which to me sounds crazy. I think to most sounds crazy. But there's some precedent for things like this happening.
Really?
Yeah. Most recently, in 2013, Harrison Okene, a ship's cook on a Nigerian fishing vessel, survived for 60 hours in a 4-foot diameter air bubble in a ship's bathroom when his ship sank
Whoa.
in the Atlantic Ocean. The ship was overturned and 100 feet deep in the water. Yeah.
Holy
Whoa.
shit.
He was the only survivor. And he was found by, like, divers investigating the wreckage, still alive. Just kind of in
Holy
this air
shit.
bubble.
That's almost 3 days.
Yeah, it was almost 3 days. Apparently, so because it's a small air bubble and it shouldn't have lasted him 3 days, but because air compressed as the boat sank, the pressure compressed the air, meaning it was basically a larger quantity of oxygen in a smaller space, which allowed him to breathe for 3 days. Apparently, it was horrific. It was freezing cold because it's very cold at the bottom of the ocean. Harrison could hear his crewmates being eaten by fish just outside of the bubble, and he was trapped in the bathroom, a tiny bathroom. And he had to hold on to the basin of the toilet because he's upside down. He had to hold on to this basin to keep his head from going into the water when he was rescued, but he's fine. He's still kicking it somewhere, doing his thing. The article I read did say that he retired from sea life.
Yeah, no shit.
It's always the ship's cook that survives, right?
Yeah.
You ever seen like Deep Blue Sea?
No.
No.
It's a movie from like 1999 with LL Cool J. LL Cool J is like the cook on this weird experimental shark installation, and he's just crushing it. So that's just one example, and this theory does sound nuts, I think. The origins of the people living in an air bubble on the Titanic go all the way back to the immediate aftermath of the sinking. Right after, 4 days after the sinking, in fact, the U.S. government held an inquiry with a whole series of Senate hearings chaired by a William Alden Smith, a Republican senator from Michigan. He questioned surviving crew and passengers maybe too soon after, perhaps too soon after the things, because the hearings were widely criticized for being like too emotional, too populist.
Fucking ghoulish.
Kind of, yeah. Apparently Smith apparently had an axe to grind as he was a personal opponent of J.P. Morgan, who owned the White Star Line. So he was basically out to get Morgan and was out to prove that the whole thing was unsafe and crazy. So there was a lot of controversy surrounding these hearings. But during the hearings, Senator Smith privately took questions from the general public and then relayed them directly to the survivors. So he would just take submissions. And one of the questions was, could passengers have survived inside the watertight compartments in the Titanic? The answer given by the crew, relevant experts, was no, absolutely not. During the course of that line of questioning, Smith suggested that the original intent of the watertight compartments on the Titanic may have been to shelter passengers in the event of a sinking because the White Star Line knew that there were not enough lifeboats. So Smith kind of made this his own little conspiracy theory that because they knew that they didn't have enough lifeboats on board, they built these watertight compartments to basically shelter a new society in an air bubble in the event of a sinking.
Wouldn't it probably be a lot cheaper and more economical to just have more lifeboats than to build an entire airtight compartment in your boat?
Yes, it absolutely would.
Okay, just making sure.
Like I said, these were criticized as being way too emotional, populist, and there was just kind of a lot of nonsense. But that actually was brought up on the floor of the Senate, the idea that there's survivors living in the Titanic air bubble. And ever since then, this has been in the public consciousness a little bit. Of course, the compartments are there for buoyancy. They're to keep a ship that size afloat. They're necessary. And they have nothing to do with sheltering anyone in the event of a sinking. They're just big rooms sealed full of air. But they're watertight, so I think Smith knew. Most people believe that Smith knew that was ridiculous, but that he was using this to call attention to the lack of lifeboats, and not just that, like the intentional negligence that they knew. He was using this to serve as evidence of an intentional negligence, right? These hearings were very popular in America, but were criticized. Smith was ridiculed in the British media. I have these quotes from the British media. This is just a collection of... It's funny because in the American... I think the British were a little defensive about their precious boat. Just a tad defensive. The hearings did have a maybe a little bit of a emotional tone to them. It was often reported that Smith seemed personally angry at surviving crew members. So, and again, we're talking about the Titanic sank on the 15th. These hearings convened on the 19th. It was just right then. But here's some portrayals of Smith in the British media. Wait, crap. The Graphic claimed that the senator had set the whole world laughing by his appalling ignorance betrayed by his questions. The Daily Mirror denounced him for having made himself ridiculous in the eyes of British seamen. The Daily Mail said Smith has no technical knowledge and his proceedings show a want of familiarity with nautical matters and with the sea. And my personal favorite, the Daily Express referred to Smith as a backwoodsman from Michigan, which the newspaper characterized as a state populated by kangaroos and by cowboys with an intimate acquaintance of prairie schooners as the only kind of boat.
All true.
Yeah, kangaroos and cowboys. Bombastic and grotesque is later called the hearings. Right. So anyway, but I think the fact that the air bubble theory was brought to the Senate floor, and kind of endorsed by the chairman of the Senate inquiry into the Titanic sinking, gave it some life. But of course, so that's the one argument. There you have that on the one hand. You have some speculation and some people on the internet. On the other hand, it's completely impossible. Harrison O'Kenney, for example, survived for 3 days in 100 feet of water. The Titanic was 2.3 miles down.
Shit.
So a lot more than 100 feet. At this depth, the water pressure would have just completely violently collapsed any air bubbles at all.
And probably any human bodies, right?
Yeah, the one source I saw, it wasn't really a source, it was a comment on something. Actually, it was a comment on a message board. What was that called? There's a whole Titanic Wikipedia. Did you find this? Encyclopedia Titanica.
Yeah, I saw that.
But yeah, it was on Encyclopedia. I believe the phrase "pink mist" was used for what would happen to a human body with that much pressure.
Yeah.
It's possible for people they could have survived minutes, maybe, but they would all be not just dead, but, pulverized by the time they reached the seafloor. Ignoring the whole, collapsing your lungs type of thing, and smashing any air bubbles, any sections that would have had an air bubble would actually have been flattened like a tin can because of the pressure, would have just crushed it.
Yeah.
But ignoring all that, the oxygen that compresses, that favored our friend Harrison, that's all fine and good to an extent, but at that depth, the oxygen would be so compressed and so dense that it would actually be poisonous to breathe. And that would kill you, and also you would also die of hypothermia because you were at the bottom of the... It's cold as shit.
Yeah, if people are dying of hypothermia at the surface, surely
they could make a fire. I was trying to figure out why this is still around, and apparently there was a made-for-TV movie from the 80s called Goliath Awaits, about an ocean liner sunk by a German U-boat in 1939, whose wreck is discovered in 1981 with over 300 survivors and their descendants living in an air bubble inside the ship.
That sounds sick, and what a cool name, also.
I know, right? Now I want to watch it. But
Yeah.
I wonder if that crappy... Maybe it's great. You know what? I've
Christopher
never
Lee
seen it.
is in it.
Yeah, I wonder if that movie has just kind of kept this alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, that's Air Bubble. It's impossible, but it's fun to imagine fancy 20s mermaids or 1910s mermaids underwater, dancing about.
A new Atlantis.
Playing the piano in the grand hall inside of a giant air bubble.
Upside down.
And they're like, oh, I love this kelp.
Exactly.
I really hope that there wasn't an air bubble and that those people died fast.
I mean, even if there was an air bubble, they would have been dead before they even like hit the seafloor.
Yeah.
Like they would be super dead
Well,
just from pressure.
Good for them.
Yeah.
You don't
Don't
want to be
worry.
at the bottom of an
For
ocean.
them.
Hell
Yeah.
no. No.
But I
thank
like
you.
that this is a conspiracy theory started by a senator.
Yeah.
Like on the floor of the Senate during the Titanic hearings, just because he wanted to piss off J.P. Morgan,
Who was an asshole.
who was an asshole. Although, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that these hearings, although they were, widely mocked in the British press, led to some important maritime reforms that we still have, including you have to have as many lifeboats as people on the ship. Mm-hmm. Like that, you.
That seems
Yeah,
so obvious.
that like came out of this hearing. Those laws originated here. There's also the law that you need to slow down when entering hazardous waters. That was new. That was introduced.
Instead of
Yeah.
speed up.
No, like literally, that was introduced because of these hearings. Also, improvements in ship-to-ship radio communication standards. And I think there was something about binoculars being available in the cabin that was controversial.
Oh boy.
During, one of the apparently somebody from the crew testified that there weren't binoculars in the front cabin, so they wouldn't have been able to spot the iceberg anyway.
Oh my god.
I don't know if anything came of that, but
You'd
yeah,
think.
just some stuff that seems like some no-brainers was codified here.
It's crazy how much, when you look at historical events like this, how much stuff is new.
I know.
Like
Yeah.
I was thinking about Columbine the other day, how like during the Columbine shootings, the cops got called immediately and they wouldn't go in. They didn't go in until like hours later because the idea of like SWAT procedures where you go in and force, even when you know that there's an active shooter, just didn't exist yet. The idea was like
God.
you wait it out. And you try
Oh
to
my
get people
gosh.
out from the outside. You don't go in.
Oh my god.
And that was not that long ago.
That's crazy.
Or, like you could rape your wife until the 80s or whatever. A lot of stuff you'd think, like, we would have figured out. Seatbelts are not even that old.
Or like black people being able to vote.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah. Stuff that's, you would think maybe a little earlier.
But
Nope.
no,
No.
not really.
Yeah, we just figured it out. All right.
Well, thank you so much. That was awesome, Dylan.
Yeah.
Of course.
I would love, Izzy, if you feel up for drawing an illustration of the people down in the air bubble.
Oh, here, let me start a sketch.
I would love to see it. I'm going to talk about the Titanic switch conspiracy. So we talked about kind of the basic facts about the Titanic already, what it was, what happened. A lot of people died, more than half of the people on board. And the important thing to know, I think the really important background to know for this story is about the three sister ships. The White Star Line built the Olympic, and then they built the Titanic, and then they built the Britannic. And those three ships are very, very physically similar to each other. So the Olympic was already running before the Titanic was launched. And the Olympic had some issues because it was the first one of the three sister ships. It had some electrical problems, and it had been hit accidentally by this British military ship called the HMS Hawke. I guess what had happened was that the Olympic was like going really fast, and was too close to the HMS Hawke, and it like sucked the Hawke into its pull, like the gravitational pull, but it's in the water. Yeah, thank you, Dylan. Into its wake, and so the Hawke like rammed into the Olympic, but it was the Olympic's fault. So the Olympic sustained really serious damage because of this collision. But that actually kind of was good for White Star's reputation because it bolstered the reputation that this series of ships was unsinkable. Because even though it was a really bad hit, it still went back to shore and was fine, relatively speaking. It didn't sink. So the theory, that's like the important background for the theory, which is proposed by this guy named Robert Gardner in his book, which is called Titanic, the ship that never sank, with a question mark. The theory goes that the cost of fixing the Olympic was really high, and it wouldn't have been covered by White Star's insurance because the Olympic was deemed to be at fault for that accident. This is true. This part is not conspiracy. It would have been expensive for them to fix the Olympic. So the company that White Star Lines was a subsidiary of was owned by JP Morgan, which Dylan already talked about. And his theory, Gardner's theory, is that instead of losing a bunch of money fixing the Olympic, that they pretend the Olympic is the Titanic and then fake a crash with an iceberg so they can recover the full insurance money for the Olympic disguised as the Titanic, and that the Titanic disguised as the Olympic continue to run for as long as they want without needing any repairs. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. I kind of thought you would say that because it's
okay.
It's a lot to take in.
So the Olympic was so you're saying the original Olympic was not salvageable, but was still seaworthy?
So it would have been really expensive to fix the damage to its hull, and none of it was covered by their insurance.
So they're saying that they disguised the damaged ship as the Titanic and then arranged an accident so the already damaged ship sank and not...
Right.
Right.
So the new ships that they had
money.
just built, which was supposed to be the Titanic, would take the Olympic's place, and then the Olympic, pretending to be the new ship, the Titanic, would go out to sea and crash deliberately. Although it would look like an accident, they would get insurance money, and then they would be able to, fully recover and keep the Olympic in service for as long as they needed and recoup their insurance money. Okay, so that's like the basic idea. They looked nearly identical because they were built at the same time by the same company, and they were supposed to be sister ships. The differences were pretty minor. It's like the number of portholes, certain architectural features, some of the decks and promenades looked a little bit different. The Titanic had a few more parlors, and it had a bigger restaurant for first class. So they took the kind of what was wrong with the Olympic, things that people had complained about, and they made them better for the Titanic.
Got it.
But a lot of people had never seen the interior of the Titanic because it crashed on its maiden voyage. It's not completely clear what exactly it looked like inside, at least not based on photographs. Dylan, yes, question.
Yes. So if the Olympic was already built and was sailing around and shit, why was the Titanic a big deal if it was identical?
It was a little bit bigger, mostly because it was heavier.
Is this just one of those things where people in the past were just excited about anything happening because nothing was going on?
Partly, but actually it's a little bit of a misconception that the Titanic launch was a huge deal.
Oh.
That's something that's retroactively been sort of put on it because of its notoriety as a ship that sank. But I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
We'll get to its actual popularity because that's interesting.
Okay.
So not many people aside from the crew had been on both ships. Most of the similarities between the two ships could have been explained by the fact that they were sister ships. Gardner says that the plan was to crash the ship safely by having it hit not really an iceberg, but actually another stationed ship that had its lights off, which was also owned by JP Morgan's company. And either doing that or opening they're called seacocks, opening the seacocks. They're the holes that let water in, and then having the water go into the bottom of the boat slowly enough that people could safely disembark. So the idea was not that it would crash in the way that it did end up crashing. The idea was we'll have it hit a little boat, and then we'll say, oh, we hit an iceberg, and now the boat's going to sink slowly. Or we'll open up the seacocks, and the water will come in real slow, and the boat will get too heavy, and it'll sink. But they thought that they would have hours and hours and hours. If this is true, that's how it's explained.
Would this be during the maiden voyage, or would this be after that expedition was completed?
It would be during. They wouldn't want it to get all the way to New York and have people, photograph it more and inspect it again and stuff like that. So the plan, if this is true, the plan is to crash it on the maiden voyage. Yeah. So, and then the idea was the Carpathia and other boats that were nearby could come by and get everyone off, and it wouldn't matter that they didn't have enough lifeboats because they would just use them to ferry people back and forth. A couple pieces of evidence that have been cited for this theory are So when a boat is new, it has to do sea trials, right? It has to go out and it's like a test drive or a safety test to make sure that it can withstand what it's supposed to withstand. The Titanic's sea trials only lasted a day, whereas the Olympics had lasted 2, so that was like notably short. Gardner proposes that this is because there was all of the internal damage from it being hit before, and they didn't want it to have 2 days of sea trials because that would have weakened the reconstructed hull. It wouldn't have been able to withstand the high speeds of a serious sea trial. And that's true that the sea trials were only a day long. A lot of people allege that the Titanic had 14 portholes when it was docked, but some later images obviously show 16. This is probably just because they're actually looking at pictures of the other boat. It's not totally clear what is going on here, but it does sometimes look like it only has 14 and sometimes looks like it has 16. And the Olympic had 14. So, no, sorry, the Olympic had 6. There's something about the number of portholes. And it's one of the things that people point to. So lots of people, this is pretty well backed up historically, both people on the ship and people watching the ship depart, noticed that the Titanic had a significant portside list. So it was like tilting a little to one side. And that is definitely true that it had a list. There are like firsthand accounts of people being in the dining room and like being able to tell in a, like consistently, not just one time or whatever, that, things were tilting to one side, like the water in the glasses was tilting to one side, and you could visibly see that the whole ship had a little bit of a list. And so the theory is that was because of the damage from when the Hawk hit the Olympic. Another piece of evidence is that Bruce Ismay, who is the director of the White Star Lines, allegedly ordered that the linoleum floors in the ship be covered with carpet at the last minute, either to make it look different or to hide old footprints and stains from when it was the Olympic.
Yeah, you could gussy it up to like change the interior, and people, like most casual observers, wouldn't think twice if it was like, oh well, the old ship had linoleum floor and this one has carpet, and like the old one had these sconces and this one has like candelabras or whatever.
Right. Yeah, you could change a lot of superficial things to make it different. The only like major change is like a couple more rooms, and the way the structure of the promenade was like a little bit different. But even that is potentially changeable.
Yeah. At least not very much money compared to like building a new ship.
Yeah, totally.
No, it's so crazy. This reminds me so much of like the Princess Cruises gem class debacle.
Oh, tell us more.
So I'm a kind of a cruise ship industry news kind of aficionado. I follow it. I follow the news of the industry.
When you say Diamond Princess, you don't mean the rapper Trina?
No, I don't mean the rapper Trina. I mean the gem class cruise ship, the Diamond Princess. So when the gem class was
gym class,
new,
like where you go to do the presidential fitness test?
No, like gem. Like they're all like, it's like emerald, ruby, sapphire. They're all gemstones.
Okay.
They're all named after gemstones. But anyway, the flagship, the big deal launch of what was in the largest cruise ship was supposed to be the Diamond Princess. But the original Diamond Princess, while it was being built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries of Japan, suffered a large fire right before it was completed, and it burned it all up. Fortunately, the Sapphire it burned it all up. But fortunately, the Sapphire Princess, which was supposed to be the second ship launched, was already underway. And they figured that if they rushed construction on the Sapphire Princess and swapped the names between the two ships, they could launch it on schedule rather than delaying the whole launch of the gem-class ships. So Sapphire Princess became the Diamond Princess, was launched on schedule, and then they had, more months to fix the damage of the burned original Diamond Princess, which was later launched as the Sapphire Princess.
Whoa.
But this was 2006.
Well, where'd they get the idea, though?
Right? This is something that happens. All I'm saying is maybe that's a tangent, or maybe this is just something that happens all the time.
Maybe.
And it's hush-hush.
Maybe it's normal in the boat industry.
There's also a theory that the Titanic was on fire for days and days before it launched its
That's
voyage.
not a theory. That's true.
All boats are on fire.
Yeah.
Large
all
boats.
the time?
Pretty much.
It's really normal, yeah.
Yeah.
For it to always be on fire?
They just have little
rooms.
fires going because they're coal, especially coal ships.
Yeah, there's constantly little fires in the engine rooms of big ships.
Oh, yeah. Like, the theory is that they didn't understand the magnitude of the fire at that time because it was buried in coal. And then by the time they realized, like, it was hotter than it should have been, like, it should have been at least under control, those, like, small fires in the coal room. But it had reached such a destructive high temperature that it weakened the metal, and then it crashed into the iceberg. The metal was already so damaged from the high heat of the flame in the coal room.
But, these ships can recover from that. I've been aboard the Sapphire Princess, and you cannot tell that there ever was a fire. So.
Wow. Another piece of the theory is that the Titanic was severely undersold. It had way fewer people on it than it could have had. It was at less than half capacity. Which is really interesting because there was a coal strike going on at the time, and way fewer ships were making the transatlantic journey because there was, not enough coal. So you would think that this being one of the only boats would be totally packed full, right? If that's one of the only ways that you can go. But this theory states that they deliberately undersold the tickets so it would be much easier to evacuate everyone on the ship. It is true that J.P. Morgan was probably supposed to be aboard the ship and canceled his trip. Bruce Ismay's family was supposed to be on the ship, and Bruce Ismay was there, but wait, is that true? Yeah, I think Bruce Ismay was there. Bruce Ismay's family was supposed to be aboard, and they canceled their trip. So it was just not very full, which was particularly notable at the time. But the coal strike is possibly part of why people were like not so stoked on its launch. Like Dylan was saying, why was this such a big deal if it was if it looked basically identical to another boat that had already set sail a year ahead? And the answer is like it wasn't really that big of a deal, and people were not that stoked on boats at the time. I mean, people went and watched the launch, but not as many. Fewer people attended the Titanic sea trials and launch than they did for the Olympic. Even though it's like technically bigger, it didn't really look or seem any bigger than the Olympic. So it was not the news that it could have been.
And like Dylan said, people were excited about literally anything
That's
happening.
True.
So a big boat would be like, of course you're going to go see the big boat.
Right. Well, and that was like a thing, right? People would go anytime like any boat left anywhere to do anything, any like large boat, people would come down to the docks and wave at it. That's a thing. Like anytime like a passenger liner left, people would just like, yeah, hooray! Like it.
Before TV, all you could do is just wave at a boat.
There was just like fuck all to do. It was like, do you want to read Middlemarch again, or do you want to go look at this boat? But
it's interesting that it was so undersold. And I mean, probably in reality that has to do with the fact that I imagine tickets were pretty expensive, even third class tickets, because, they were like making a big deal about it being this fancy new kind of boat. And there were obviously financial problems going on at the time, and people probably were not like, well, let's go to America. You could go to America on like a aircraft carrier. Why would why go on a fancy boat? The most sinister possibility is that JP Morgan did the whole thing to kill two birds with one stone, to recoup the costs of his ship getting damaged, and then also to kill off all of his business rivals, because some of the people who died in the Titanic were John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidore Straus, who owned Macy's, tons and tons of other like titans of industry, especially in New York, people who were JP Morgan's direct competitors and business rivals.
But he couldn't kill Senator William Alden Smith of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Sorry.
He's out there chilling with the kangaroos. He's got on his cowboy hat, and he is ready to bust the door open on
Michigan.
All this.
Yeah.
Michigan. I mean, we've discussed how Lake Superior is an inland ocean, so I actually think that he probably knew a thing or two about this.
He probably did. I mean, I think the British press probably doesn't have firsthand experience on how fucking scary Great Lakes shipping stuff is.
Hell no.
Right? It's terrifying.
The thing about this theory that JP Morgan did this to kill off his business rivals that doesn't make sense is that obviously the rich people are the people who are like most likely to survive a shipwreck, and did. Like most of the people who died in the Titanic were not the first class passengers because they got up to the lifeboats first. It is true that a lot more men died than women because, women and children are on the lifeboats first. Notably, that was not always true with the Titanic, though. There were lots of lifeboats that were like really, really underfilled. There were totally stories of like, men knocking women and children off to get onto the boats, and famous stories about people just being complete bastards with those lifeboats. But even so, like John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, it's surprising that those people did die. It's surprising that they didn't survive the sinking of the boat. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense that you would do that to kill your business rivals when you were much more likely to kill like everyone but them with that idea.
But they did die.
But they did die. It's true. Yeah. It's surprising that they died, but they did die. Mostly their wives didn't die for the most part.
Maybe he wanted to marry their wives.
Yeah, probably. That would be sick if he was like, I'm going to kill you and then fuck your wife.
I bet that was his end game.
That's sea law. If your wife dies on my boat, I get to marry her. That's how it is. Like
that's how you get a monopoly in business. You can own the Guggenheim Museum. You can own Macy's. You can own Astor Place.
And you can own their wives.
That's right. Yeah. J.P. Morgan famously had a potato nose that he wouldn't let people take pictures of.
What?
Yeah.
I'm looking this up.
Yeah, look up J.P. Morgan nose. He had something called like cauliflower nose or something. It was all purpley, and it was like covered in varicose veins, and he would like make people airbrush it out of pictures. And there's this picture of him like caning someone.
Oh God.
And you can see his big ass nose.
Jesus.
Oh my
God. So here's the thing about this, that I have my issue with this plan. I love it, actually. This is a great plan.
It's pretty good.
Except that wouldn't sinking one of your only expensive fancy new ships with people aboard it causing an unprecedented naval disaster, wouldn't that kind of be bad for your company? Like, wouldn't you lose money? Even if you saved on insurance money, wouldn't everyone not want to ever take a White Star Line boat again?
Especially a boat that you had told everyone was unsinkable.
Yeah. I feel like the loss of credibility is probably not worth whatever increased insurance payout.
Right.
And wives you'd get to own.
Right. And all the wives. That's true. If your husband dies on the boat, the owner of the boat is the new husband. That's sea law.
That was ratified during the trials, I think, actually.
Yeah, Smith really pushed for that. People were pretty confused.
That was his main objective.
Yeah. Well, because he lived on Lake Superior and he was trying to get some boat wives. So the answer to that question, Dylan, is like yes and no. Because that was what I thought at first, too. I was like, well, obviously, even if you recouped your insurance costs, the damage to your reputation as a company that builds boats that don't sink would be like enormously bad. Surprisingly, it didn't seem to have damaged their reputation as much as I thought it would, because in the immediate aftermath, people were more just like, oh, this is a terrible tragedy that happened because of an unforeseen iceberg. It was a little bit later that people started like casting blame, although obviously not Smith. He was on that track right away, 4 days. And White Star Line surprisingly did not lose as much money as you might think they would. So they got an insurance payout, and they continued to profit for two more decades. I mean, I couldn't find like specific information about, I don't know, did the stock market exist then? Yes, because it crashed not that long after.
Yeah.
But it's I'm not
famously it crashed.
Famously crashed like what 17 years later, something like longer than that. Not long. When did the stock market crash? 29. Okay, 17 years. I was right. Okay.
She's smart.
Pretty smart. So yeah, it was not good for their reputation, but it didn't sink them like you might think that it would. They had to, I mean, the aftermath of something like this, I can't imagine anyone would ever like invite upon themselves, because the potential for it to really ruin your reputation is quite high. There are like liability court trials that you have to go through. You have to refit all your current ships for new safety standards. I mean, yeah, no one sane would ever do this. It makes no sense. Another thing about it that doesn't make any sense is that it just does not add up mathematically. Both of these ships cost $7.5 million to build, and they were only insured for $1 million each. So the insurance payout is not enough to justify something like this happening at all.
Did anyone look into life insurance? Like maybe J.P. Morgan had a life insurance policy on everyone who was on the boat.
I think people would have found out about that.
Maybe.
But
maybe they didn't. Maybe we're breaking the story.
Maybe you heard it here first. He really was shameless. I do have a couple stray facts that I think are worth mentioning that are not necessarily related to this conspiracy, but maybe they are. There are 2 different crew members who survived not only the Olympics collision with the Hawk, but also the Titanic sinking, and then also the 1916 sinking of the Britannic. So all 3 sister ships.
Whoa.
2 different people were aboard for all of those incidents. There's a nurse named Violet Jessup, or a stewardess. I don't really know what that means. She did some kind of health and hospitality work aboard the ships, and a stoker, a fire guy named Arthur John Priest. So, can you imagine, like, you're aboard there's this big new ship. They're like, it's unsinkable. It hits a military cruiser. It doesn't quite crash, but almost, or it doesn't quite sink, but almost does. Then later you're on the Titanic, and then you're on the 3rd boat, and you're like, it's not going to happen again. Lightning doesn't strike 3 times, and then that one sinks too.
You think after 2,
yeah,
you'd stop rolling the dice.
Yeah, you'd think. But they both worked for the White Star Line, so like you could just get put on whatever boat you get put on, I think.
I guess, but I would think like, okay, the Lord does not want me on a boat.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm moving to Nevada.
I think one shipwreck would definitely be enough to convince me not to go on a boat again.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, same. But some people are, chase their dreams.
That's true. The captain of the Olympic later died on the Titanic sinking. So he survived the Olympic crash, even was the captain, and then was captaining the Titanic, or was aboard the Titanic doing some kind of captain type shit, and fucking died.
What a bummer.
Another cursed piece of information is that 6 people died in the shipyard while the Titanic was being constructed and fitted. Another 2 died in the shipyard workshops and shed during the time of its construction. And then just before the launch, one of the workers was killed when a piece of wood fell on him. So
that's the worst death.
9 deaths associated with the Titanic before it was even in the water.
Wow. Like being one of the 9 people who died from the Titanic, but not on the Titanic.
Yeah.
Like, what a sad place in history,
Yeah. Real bummer.
How'd your husband die? Titanic? Oh, he was on the Titanic? No.
No.
Piece of wood fell and hit him on the head. That's so sad.
Real bummer. J.B. Crafton at the Rose Hill Cemetery in Bloomington, Indiana, there's a monument to a guy who was lost on the Titanic. His body's not there, obviously, because it's in the water. Mm-hmm. But if you want some local Titanic lore, look up the Crafton grave at Rose Hill. It says "Lost on the Titanic" in it. It's pretty sick.
Whoa.
And if you want to see the famous house of a woman who survived the Titanic, go to Denver, Colorado, and go to the Molly Brown house, home of the unsinkable Molly Brown.
She was so cool.
Her house is insane.
Is she like Unsinkable Sam?
Who?
Unsinkable Sam was a cat who was on a bunch of different like warships, British Navy warships. He was on.
Oh my god! She is like that.
She
cat.
is. It's true.
Unsinkable Sam was rescued from the wreckage of the Bismarck, the German battleship Bismarck, when it sank, and then was on a British ship, and then that ship was sunk, and then another ship, and then that ship was sunk, and then eventually Unsinkable Sam retired to land.
Should he be an honorary bimbo?
Yeah.
Unsinkable Sam? Yeah, I love
Absolutely.
Unsinkable Sam.
Our first honorary bimbo is Unsinkable Sam.
Unsinkable Sam.
He's really cute.
Yeah.
Oh
he's great.
I want to see.
Unsinkable Sam's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Unsinkable Sam.
Oh, he's a
honorary
tuxedo
bimbo.
gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was on
Bastard.
3 sunken battleships during World War II.
I mean, he's like the Violet Jessup of cats.
Species, cat. Born, Nazi Germany.
Oh no!
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Was he in the Hitler Youth?
Maybe he's not an honorary bimbo.
Well, I mean, he's a cat.
I don't think cats can be Nazis.
He's a Nazi cat.
He's not a Nazi. We don't know his politics.
Unsinkable Sam, Unsinkable Sam.
All right.
What are your thoughts?
I just love that. Species, cat. Born, Nazi Germany.
Rude.
He's so cute.
All right. Any final thoughts on the Titanic?
I love it, and I want to go.
Nobody believes this poor guy, Robert Gardner, who wrote a book. I mean, in fairness to the people who don't believe him, myself included, he did put a question mark at the end of the title of his book, Titanic, the ship that never sank. Like, he's not even sure.
Yeah.
He's just like an I'm just asking questions kind of guy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm just, maybe the earth is flat. I don't know.
I don't know.
Just asking questions.
Maybe the moon doesn't exist. I'm just asking questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you guys going to get the vaccine? I don't know. I'm just asking.
A lot of questions. I don't know. My mom got it, so hopefully she doesn't, like, I don't know, start pissing poison gas or whatever it is that happens.
Oh, your
Yeah,
mom
you should
got
watch
it.
her and see if she, if something happens to her, whether,
Yeah, keep a close eye on your mom's piss for the next month.
Yeah, I mean, like, more than usual, or...
More than usual. I know you take samples regularly because you're testing for drugs, because you're a narc, but if you could do it more often, that would be really good.
I just want to keep her safe.
Sarah, stop ratting out your mom to the cops. Just because your mom's cooler than you doesn't mean you have to keep narking on her.
Yeah, Sarah.
Call into our hotline, 706-45-BIMBO, with any hot boat tips, ghostly encounters, examples of times you've had to psychically defend yourself.
Thanks so much for continuing to listen to Bimbo Summit for all these 22 magical episodes. And even though the gods are crazy,
Even though the stars are blind.
You tell him, Sam, because I got an axe to grind.
Hi, this is Izzy from Bimbo Summit. I know we've had a lot of negative talk about Canada on this podcast, and honestly, I think that's Sarah's fault. But I personally would like to apologize with this song.
Every night in my dreams I see you, I feel you. That's how I know you go on. But across the distance and spaces between us, you've come to show me